in the universe, the growth of dark matter structures. I don't know if they're able to queue up that video. Um, and so what we're going to see in this video is this is the very early universe, and it's almost completely uniform.
Yeah.
It's mostly dark matter, but spread very diffusely. And as you described, the areas where there is more dark matter are areas that grow over time and become more and more dense. And that's what we're seeing in the red areas here. And the areas where there's less stuff, the stuff gets pulled out of there, and we're seeing the formation of blue voids there. And so this is what we see happening in the universe. And if we trace the growth of structure in the universe, we end up with huge conglomerations of mass and galaxies, clusters of galaxies, and these big filaments surrounded by voids. That's what we observe in the universe. And one of the things that's very interesting about that is there's no way the galaxies and clusters of galaxies we see in the universe could form through gravitational attraction if it wasn't for the dark matter providing the scaffolding, the seeding of that. There's just not enough matter. And so what we would see is we'd see a very diffuse and different universe that didn't form these structures. So there's really no way to describe, I think, all of the observations we have that lead us to think that there's dark matter with another theory.
Now, you said you're going to give us a different perspective on dark energy.
Sure, different perspective on dark matter. So on dark energy.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we talk about when we think about dark energy is we assume, or we can assume.
What's good, everyone? We are learning about space. I was watching Kittens.
For gravity. And we've got a century of observations that tells us that. But as scientists, we don't want to necessarily assume that. So there are plenty of ways that we can fiddle with gravity that might explain some or all of the observations we have related to the expansion of the universe. And so one of the things that we're going to do with Euclid is we're going to use two separate probes of dark energy that would behave differently. These probes would give different answers if it's our theory of gravity that's incomplete, rather than gravity being complete and us having to put in this new dark energy repulsive force. So we're going to have multiple ways of measuring the expansion of the universe and the growth of these structures that's going to allow us to discern between different theories of dark energy and different theories of what we call modified gravity. So we're going to study that too. And that's what we might call another free parameter in what we're going to study. So we're trying not to assume the answer as Einstein did 100 years ago when he thought the universe was static. So we're going to study this and see what the universe tells us.
So if you were a betting person, I'm gathering you'd be comfortable putting your money down on the dark matter question. How comfortable would you be putting your money down on the dark energy explanation?
So the difference there is I'd be comfortable saying I think the universe is dominated, at least in the mass budget, by dark matter. But I would be uncomfortable putting my money down on any one particular theory of the dark energy. But I would be pretty comfortable putting my money down and saying, yeah, we live in a universe where the expansion is accelerating in the last half of the history of the universe.
Yeah.
But it's too early for me to say what I think is causing that acceleration.
Yeah.
Euclid's coming at an incredibly interesting time in cosmology because there's some what we call tensions between measurements of the very early universe and the late universe, which is what Euclid will measure. And by late universe, I mean the last half the history of the universe.
Right.
So if we look at the early universe around the time of the cosmic microwave background radiation and trace the growth of structures like I just showed you in that video to what we see today, it matches up pretty well, but we're starting to see at the few sigma level some discrepancies that may or may not be because of our observations. But if they're not because of our problems with our observations, it could imply that there's some new physics and that the physics taking us from the early universe to the late universe is incorrect or incomplete, rather.
Yeah, no.
The idea of
great example, I guess, is the Hubble tension, the measuring the expansion rate early on, and in the later universe, measuring it and trying to extrapolate or interpolate, I should say, between the two, and it doesn't quite match up.
That's right. And that could be problems with the measurements, but what's more exciting for astronomers and physicists is the possibility that there's some underlying new physics for us to discover. And Euclid's going to be fantastic as a data set for discerning between new physics and the need for better observations, because it's going to provide the better observations.
And so how would you compare, we discussed Euclid and Hubble and James Webb, but how about, you know, we made brief reference already to some of the other missions that are coming up in the next few years. How does Euclid relate to those?
Well, the next big space mission that has dark energy as one of its primary goals is NASA's Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, which we're hoping will launch in about 2027. Mm-hmm. So I'm also, as you mentioned, working on that telescope. And it's going to be very complementary to Euclid for a number of reasons. One, Roman is a bigger telescope and has the capability of looking deeper out into the universe. So it's going to take similar surveys to what Hubble does, or sorry, to what Euclid does, but it's going to take surveys that are smaller in area, but deeper. In addition to taking these surveys that are somewhat smaller in area, it's going to do something that Euclid is not. It's going to cover each area of the survey more than once. It's going to come back to the area of the survey and look at it with what we call multiple filters or multiple colors and multiple passes. And this is going to provide a really great way to have internal cross checks on the data with Roman that we won't have from Euclid. The other thing that's exciting about Roman is it adds a third technique to studying dark energy that Euclid is not going to use, and that's the looking at supernova or exploding stars.
Oh, the original approach.
That was right. That's right. So it's going to be really, Roman will be the definitive experiment to use supernova out to about the past 10 billion years of the history of the universe to study expansion of the universe. So it's going to be really exciting by adding these other this other probe. And it's also very flexible. If we find something interesting with Euclid or other telescopes in the next few years, we're able to tweak the surveys that we'll do with Roman to take advantage of that and make observations that are going to help us best pin down the mysteries of dark matter and dark energy as they exist in 2020.
Hey, well, it's good, Skippy.
And is that on track? I mean, are you deeply involved in the mechanics of getting this new telescope online?
Yes, I've been involved with what's now called Roman for about 20 years under various different names and different stages of development. And one of the things
Hello, everybody. This is Brian Green. And this...
Faith Saley, everybody.
Oh, thank you very much. And this is Brian Green's book in large print because time has ravaged my eyesight. And I first interviewed you, Brian, a few months after this book came out in May of 2020, which everyone can imagine was a very specific time. You were upstate, I think.
Yeah.
I was in an apartment on the Upper West Side. It was on Zoom. The notion of time during those early days, I mean, when people said lockdown, it was a very specific experience to talk about time then. Now, to return to this, it's the same book. It was interesting to see what I dog-eared, to see what moved me, in fact, to tears again. I took a whole bunch of new notes. And I love that we're having this discussion at the New York Historical Society because, I mean, not only is this book about the entire history of the universe and about when history will cease to exist, but also because history is arguably both a science and an art. And you characteristically make room, in this book especially, for mathematics and music, for Schrödinger and Shakespeare. And I mean, it's just a joy to turn to the index of this book because you'll find there's Higgs particle, there's Mick Jagger, there's There's Big Bang, Big Bounce, Big Crunch, Big Rip. There's Over the Rainbow, Poe, Sylvia Plath, and you spend a moment on cheesecake, which I think, and it's and you
vegan cheesecake.
Vegan cheesecake, and you make it germane. So my goal is to get to the cheesecake tonight. So history is about stories, and in this book, your story kind of begins with what you call the romance of mathematics. What do you mean by that, or what did you mean by that?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up, 4 blocks from here, 81st Street, and at an early age, my dad, who was a composer, singer, musician, he didn't go to college. He had what he called an SPHD, Seward Park High School dropout.
So good.
But he loved ideas, and so he taught me the basics of arithmetic at a very young age, and then would set me these problems, like multiply this 30-digit number by this 30-digit number, and I would spend the weekends 4 blocks from here with large pieces of construction paper just multiplying these numbers out, and it just felt to me so compelling to do something that nobody had done before. Now, in those cases, it's because it wasn't interesting. Yeah.
You weren't trying to just get your dad's approbation. You loved it.
Yeah, totally. No, I just got pulled into this world of numbers, and it was kind of a romance of this mathematical language, which I feel strongly is one that we invent, that we don't discover, but this wondrous thing that we compose that allows us to go off into strange places of prime numbers and the Riemann zeta function. We all make these ideas up, but this world that we create is so rich and compelling.
Raise your hand if you're waiting for him to say Riemann zeta function. But in the book, you say that part of the romance, and this is relevant to this notion of thinking about our time, and how finite it is that mathematics is a journey toward insights so fundamental they will never change.
Yeah.
Mathematics is permanent?
The truths are, and to me that is a remarkable quality. It was really first emphasized to me, again, when I was quite young. I went to IS 44, which is like 3 blocks from here, and I exhausted the math curriculum relatively quickly. So one of the teachers there gave me a letter. I didn't know what it said at the time. He said, take this, go up to Columbia and find somebody to teach you. So together with my older sister, I was like a little tiny, just like this. So we'd like walk in, we started knocking on doors, randomly handing this letter, and most would read it and hand it back. But in the math department, knocked on one door and gave it to a fellow, and he read it and he said, sure, I'll teach you. For free. We didn't have any money or anything. And so I would go 3 times a week, and he would take me on these mathematical journeys. And he was the one who really, when I started to get interested in physics, and I was asking him, like, why do you do math? Why is it your thing? And he said, I do math because once you prove a theorem, it stands forever. And it finally hit me. Everything else is impermanent. But these deep truths that come from this language of mathematics, they do stand beyond the test of time. And so there is something deeply compelling to latch on to those qualities of the world that are immutable. And mathematics certainly are among those qualities.
And your grasp of mathematics and your participation in the way mathematics has pushed our understanding has led people like you to understand that the math tells us the universe is going to end, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. You develop a language initially to describe everyday objects and entities with precision. That's really where mathematics comes from. But then you can follow the math to begin to talk about things that we can't directly see or observe or test, and yet are relevant to our sense of who we are and how we fit into some grand picture. And certainly after Albert Einstein gave us the mathematics of the general theory of relativity, which is our understanding of gravity that's most relevant for how the universe evolves on the largest of scales, when you follow that mathematics forward in time, in essence allowing you to kind of turn a cosmic film toward the future, the frames in that cosmic film are not particularly happy if you go sufficiently far into the future.
That's a spoiler alert, but you don't pull punches. You kind of tell us that right away.
Yeah.
Right away.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to get the bad news part over with early in the evening. I mean, let's get to some numbers.
Yeah.
How old is the universe and how much time do we have left?
Yeah.
My birthday's on Friday, so I'm feeling urgency.
Yeah, so at least on human scales, it's a relatively calming story. So back to the Big Bang is about 13.8 billion years. And that's an enormous time scale. It's so large that even that's hard to wrap your mind around what that really means. But just to give a sense, if you were to compress all of cosmic history from the beginning until today into a single calendar year, as Carl Sagan told us to do decades ago, then all of recorded history takes place in the last 10 seconds of that calendar year. So December 31st at 11:59 and 50 seconds is when we start to begin to record things that are happening in the human landscape. All the rest is the lead up to that particular moment. So that's from the beginning until today, which is enormous. But then if you go from today into the future, the timescales get even longer. And I could take us through those real quickly if that would be a relevant thing to do. But I don't want to step on your narrative, however you want to go.
No, that's fine. I'm quite breathlessly concerned about how long humans are going to last.
Yeah, well, that is a much more difficult question to address. It's obviously an important one to all of us. But because humans are these complex combination of ingredients, I believe we're still fully governed by laws of physics, and we can pursue that further. But to make predictions about human behavior is more challenging than describing the behavior of
Hey, whiskered.
as a whole.
Right, because this is a very self-centered human question, right? Because we could kill ourselves off a planet anytime soon, and the universe isn't going to blink.
Yeah, and it likely will happen. But if you put that to the side, the fact that there's a significant chance that we will self-annihilate one way or another. Putting that to the side, you can say, how long will the Earth be here, at least in principle? And so that's probably on the order of 5 billion or so more years. Because in about 5 billion years, the sun is going to swell to over 200 times its current size. It will certainly engulf.
So if you just joined us,
it may engulf
and we are
the Earth.
watching
If it doesn't, it will certainly
my
swallow
kitten.
the Earth. And
This is a live kitten camera. She's
if
3
the Earth
days old.
happen to survive that,
Or he.
then it will hang around for another 100 billion years when it will spiral in to the dead sun.
Math tells us all of this?
Yeah, that's the amazing thing. And systems like the sun and the earth, although they seem complicated perhaps if you just sort of think about it casually, they're actually relatively simple. What is the sun? It's a spherical ball of gas. What is the earth? It's a spherical ball of rock. We have these complex shapes with all these inner processes that define what it means to be human, but inside the sun, there's not all that much going on. Inside the earth, not all that much going on from the standpoint of physics. That allows us to calculate the behavior of these macroscopic objects with significant confidence.
Is there a thing that is time if there is no consciousness to clock it? Pun intended?
Yeah, I don't know. Could time itself simply be a product of human ingenuity, allowing us to organize our perceptions of the world around us? It could be that that's what time is. But if you think somewhat more fundamentally of time as the language that allows us to discuss change, right? That's what time really is. It allows us to say, things were like this then, and they're like this now, and so there was a development, and time is the dimension along which that development can take place. Now, certainly change happened before human beings were here, right? I mean, we have great confidence, again, the Big Bang yields ultimately galaxies and stars and planets. We understand in rough outline those processes. Things really did happen. And so it suggests strongly that there was a conception of time before we humans were here to recognize it, and presumably there will be a conception of time after we are gone.
Because things will unfold.
Yes.
And we call that entropy, and we will get to that in a moment. I just I love all the little nuggets that one picks up reading this. I mean, it's hard to have a a dinner party discussion of entropy to the extent you can, but I do love learning that the Big Bang, the idea of the Big Bang, wasn't it articulated by a Jesuit priest?
Yeah, it's true. I don't know how many people are familiar with the name Georges Lemaitre. I mean, just a clap. Do you know that name? It's pretty tepid. Everybody
They might
clap
be
just so I can
French.
get a sense. Yeah,
There we go.
Thank you.
Father George.
Hey, what's good? How you doing, Jojo?
Not zero, but you know, it is a no name. And he was an unusual character because not only did he have a PhD in physics
From MIT.
but he was a Jesuit priest, and he deeply wanted to understand the Big
How are you keeping, buddy?
And after Einstein wrote down the equations of the general theory of relativity, Lemaitre was the first to successfully.
Yeah, I'm keeping well. Kitten's doing well as well. She's he's 3 days old,
Earlier on, but Lemaitre's the one who
and
really
we named him
put the idea
Caelus. But we're learning about space at the moment.
universe should
Hey, you're drunk. Nice. Well, welcome, buddy.
expanding. Then if you sort of wind that,
What you been drinking?
everything gets smaller and smaller toward the past, suggesting that everything was compressed together into what he called the primeval atom, sort of an initial atom from which everything emerged. Going
Jupiter.
forward.
What's
is
that?
not in the Old Testament.
Well, it depends how you interpret
Depends
the
how you
words.
interpret it, yeah. But
Oh,
it's
yeah. I've seen that. Yeah.
And I'll let you have the glory.
A
Will you
Belgian
tell
beer.
what Einstein said when he saw Lemaitre's calculation.
Yeah, so Lemaitre joins Einstein at the Solvay conference in Brussels in 1920.
I'm a vodka guy myself.
To alert, the great master regarding what he had found using the great master's
God, I love a
own
bit of vodka.
equations. And Einstein just
Do you know anything about space and all of this? Because I'm new to it. Like,
physics is abominable.
this guy, Brian Greene's
And
fantastic.
what Einstein meant by that was you can't believe all mathematics is relevant to
Like,
the world.
dude, this guy, he makes all that smart shit,
Which math
like,
really
sound
tells
dumb
us
for people like me to understand.
seriously about
Do you know what I
reality,
mean?
Which math might be good
He
math,
actually makes it
calculations are correct, but
understandable.
belongs in a mathematics textbook, not as a guide to the way the universe actually works. Now, the reason Einstein knew that the calculations were correct is he'd already seen them about 5 years earlier.
Yeah,
by
boy.
a Russian physicist named Alexander Friedmann, who
Alexander
kind of did the same
Friedmann.
calculation and showed it to
Could be
Einstein.
making
At that point,
calculations for
Einstein
you.
said, your calculations are incorrect. And he wrote a little criticism of the paper, sent it to the journal, but Friedman stayed on Einstein and proved to Einstein that the calculations were correct. So Einstein
Oh, look at the
changed his
kitten.
criticism to say, the calculations are fine, I don't think it's relevant to the world. But in the margin of the criticism, you can literally see that Einstein was saying, but this is irrelevant to anything that we would care. And then he nicely didn't.
Still got his eyes closed. I can't remember. How
a
many
little bit,
days is
he
it?
rose above, it would sound like sour grapes at that point. But he clearly did not think that the universe is expanding.
At what point did he see the light?
Well, he saw the light when we saw
8
the
days.
light. So Edwin Hubble, using the powerful telescope at Mount Wilson Observatory, saw the light from distant galaxies that he recognized by virtue of how the light was being stretched. That the galaxies were all
Did you know a kitten will double its birth weight in its first week of being alive?
Get stretched outward, red shifted is the
How
language
crazy is
we
that?
use. And he found a pattern in the red shifts that the farther a galaxy is, the faster it was moving away, which is exactly what you'd expect from a universe that's expanding. And once that data was clear, Einstein pretty much agreed. But I have to give you a small footnote that we never say, but since it's a friendly small group here,
It stays here.
the fact of the matter is, although we tell that story, it's only partly correct. Certainly the data helped Einstein get over this notion that the universe was static, eternal, unchanging, which is his philosophical prejudice. But it was really Arthur Eddington, another famous physicist from that age. And not to go footnote on footnote, but he's the guy who, when a reporter said to him, how does it feel to be one of 3 people who understands the general theory of relativity, he thought pensively and said, I'm trying to think who the 3rd person is. So Eddington, who clearly Einstein respected, he understood the general theory of relativity well, showed Einstein that Einstein's view that the universe might be static and unchanging, that the math showed that that solution to his equations was itself unstable. If you breathe slightly in this universe, if you flick it slightly, it will either start expanding or contracting. And so once Einstein saw that the math was unstable, he said, aha, this is not a viable way of envisioning the universe, at least according to his own general theory of relativity. Bottom line, though, by 1931, Einstein is a convert. He realizes that space is expanding.
And while we're dealing with fun trivia you can share with friends, the Big Bang was coined almost just dismissively, right? On the BBC?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was an alternative theory that was being pursued. It's called the steady state cosmology. And one of the proponents of that theory was on BBC discussing it and sort of dismissively refers to this other idea of an expanding universe as it all begins in one big bang, you know? And people are like, oh, Big Bang. You know,
Catchy.
good name, catchy name.
It'll make a great sitcom someday. Yeah. And that was in 1949.
48, yeah.
Or 48, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the two processes that are running the show are entropy and evolution. And of course, one degrades and creates disorder, and the other creates and builds. And you talk about how they must act as a pair. You call it the entropic two-step.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so there really are these two dominant trends. You know, if we try to understand the evolution of the universe from the Big Bang until today and on to the future, you can get mired in details, and for certain questions, that's really important to do. But if you can find overall patterns and tendencies, it gives you a better understanding of what's going on, at least from sort of a 30,000-foot level. And the two dominant processes are, number one, the rise in entropy. This is called the second law of thermodynamics. It was developed as far back as the 1800s. It's something that we're all familiar with. Order tends to degrade into disorder.
You've been to my apartment.
There you go,
Yes.
right? So you leave in the morning and maybe it's all straightened up. You come back at night. How
Legos.
often is it more order?
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost always the case that it goes from order to disorder. And it makes sense because there are so many ways for things to be disordered. The Legos could be here or there, the kitchen, bathroom, you know, everywhere. But there are very few ways for it to be ordered. So it's harder to be ordered than disordered. And when we use the language of entropy, entropy is a measure of how much disorder. That's all that it is. And the idea is that entropy tends to increase because it's easier for things to have higher entropy than lower entropy. And as much as that's true at your house, it's true in the cosmos. So we believe the Big Bang was a highly ordered beginning, still uncertain why that is. Who, what, or how made it ordered at the very beginning. We don't know the answer to that, but it began in that highly ordered state and has been going toward ever greater disorder. But then you can ask yourself, well, if it's going toward ever greater disorder, what about us, right? These objects
We're
were all
so amazing.
highly ordered,
Yeah.
right? And that's where this other process of evolution comes into the story, which has an interplay with this. Evolution has this wonderful capacity to build structures that are ever better adapted to their environment. Now, normally we talk about that when you learn in high school at the level of living systems, right? That's, after all, how Darwin wrote it down. Living systems have progeny. Progeny generally can differ from their parents. Those distinct characteristics that make the progeny better able to survive are likely to persist because they will cause the being to survive and reproduce and thereby spread to future generations. Good. But there's a version of evolution by natural selection that's much more general than the way Darwin initially framed it. Molecules themselves can engage in a version of evolution by natural selection.
You call that chemical combat?
It's a kind of chemical combat, exactly, because if you have molecules in some sense battling against other molecules to gain raw materials, because once a molecule learns how to make a copy of itself, and this is something that molecules can do, like we know how DNA does, it's a molecule that makes a copy of itself. A molecule, if it can pull in raw materials and use its own structure as a template for making copies of itself, those molecules that can make more copies faster, swifter, with greater economy and stability, those molecules are going to win in the sense that they're going to dominate the molecular demographics And if that molecule makes a copy that's not precisely the same, a mutation, progeny that differs from the parent, if the progeny is even better at making copies, then it will come to dominate the environment. So over a long period of time, you go from molecule to molecule to molecule, becoming ever better adapted to the environment until you get complex collections of molecules like us that are pretty good at being
Brian
adapted
Greene
to
just
their
makes
surroundings.
everything so
And so
interesting.
you've got, on the one hand, entropy driving us toward ever greater disorder. You've got evolution by natural selection allowing complex structures organized to exist. And so these two forces play off of each other as the universe unfolds.
And yet, even with the existence of these, I don't know if the word is anomalous, organized structures that evolution creates, entropy still increases?
That's right. So you might say, does evolution violate
Right.
the second law of thermodynamics? Does the formation of an orderly structure like a human being, or to be simpler, a star or a planet, does that somehow violate the drive toward ever greater disorder? And the answer is actually no. And it's a beautiful fact, because take a star, a really good example. A star forms from a lot of gas that falls in on itself because of the gravitational pull of each molecule of gas on every other. Now, as the star is forming, it gives off a great amount of heat and light in the process. That heat and light streams outward, carrying away a whole lot of disorder, a whole lot of entropy. So even though the star is a pocket of order, if you take into account the entirety of the environment that the star's formation influences, there's more disorder ejected to the wider world than there is order that's formed. So overall, entropy goes up, even though you're left with a beautiful ordered star.
Again, with the Lego, my kids can make a Lego castle, but there are pieces all over the carpet because they had to root through everything to make something with order.
They'd even go a little bit further. So let's say they were to use up all those pieces on the carpet.
Okay.
Where then would you get the extra entropy from?
It would be from when I step on them and scream in pain. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, that's certainly part of it. You have to take that contribution too. But as your kids are putting the Lego pieces in, they're burning up energy. They are giving off sweat and disturbing the molecular environment around them. And if you take into account all of that, there's more disorder being generated than order formed.
You even talk about consciousness as the act of thinking you call environmental waste.
Yes.
That, I mean, sometimes we meet people and we're like, I get it. The way that person is thinking feels like environmental waste, let's compost. But consciousness, you say that at some point, our capacity for thought will be part of what burns ourselves out.
Yeah, because if you go back...
That's just for really smart people like you.
Well, you know, you asked a question earlier in terms of how long could we last?
Yeah.
And as I said, it's a little hard to give a precise number because of human behavior, but you might ask a related question, which is, in the best of all worlds, if we are maximally smart at not annihilating ourselves and maximally clever about maybe uploading our consciousness into more durable structures, how long could we last if we're able to do all of that? And that's a question that we can address. Because if you take into account that the act of thinking is itself a physical process, I mean, you can question that, but I'm pretty confident that that's the case, that the act of thinking is just a physical process taking place inside of our heads. It too is subject to the second law of thermodynamics, which means every time you have a thought, you are emitting waste to the environment. Now here's the...
What's the waste made of?
The waste is heat. That's the most basic form of entropy, the random motion of particles created because you've heated up the system. And if you take into account that in roughly 10 to the 50 years from now, it's a long time, right? We're 10 to the 10 years from the Big Bang.
Okay.
But stay with me. If you go 10 to the 50 years into the future, you can calculate what the environment will be like. And you can show that the environment will not be able to absorb any more waste heat at that point.
Like not one bit.
That's right.
One thought could break the camel's back.
So one more thought and the heat will not be able to disperse outward, and so you will burn up, you will fry in the process of trying to think.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's the point when even thought itself will draw to an end.
So you already mentioned there are. I feel like
That's
in this book
insane.
you kind of explicate just about everything. I mean, Big Bang. He talks about Mick Jagger as legendary if he's considered through the lens of sexual selection, right? He's part of our evolution. But you are swift and unapologetic to name at least two great mysteries that scientists like you have not solved. One, you mentioned, we know what the materials of the Big Bang were. We, and when I say we, I mean you, know when the Big Bang happened, nobody knows how the materials got there.
Yeah.
How something was out of nothing.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's a who, what, where'd they come from?
Yeah, no, it's all of those are good, deep questions. And I wish I had something insightful to say about it. The best that we can really do at the moment is to know possibilities. So one possibility might be that the Big Bang was the beginning of our realm of reality, but that it wasn't the beginning of everything. So in the question of where did it come from, there may have been a whole prehistory to the Big Bang, which may have involved other Big Bangs, giving rise to other realms. But of course, that just pushes the question a little bit further back. I mean, maybe far, far back, but it still asks us to give an explanation of how whatever preceded the Big Bang got started. And so we don't have an answer to that. The other possibility is somewhat more conservative, which is to imagine that there is no before the Big Bang, that time itself starts with the Big Bang. You know, a good analogy is, you know, if you were to try to walk north on planet Earth and you pass by someone and you ask them which way is north, they point you, you keep on going, you pass by somebody else, they continue to point you. But when you get to the North Pole and you say to somebody there, how do I go further north than the North Pole? They say, we don't really know what that means. North begins at the North Pole. You can't go further north than the North Pole. It's a meaningless question. It may be the same thing with time. Go back 100, 1,000, a billion years, go right back to the Big Bang, and the notion of going further back may be as meaningless as going further north than the North Pole. So it could have all started then, but still I have no insight into why there is something rather than nothing, right? That's the most basic fundamental question. And by nothing, I don't mean empty space. I mean truly nothing. No space, no time, no energy, no quantum fields, no nothing. Why is it not like that?
The other, I mean, I'm sure there are mysteries that you articulate that I'm not remembering, but the other big one is consciousness, right? So many of you know that Brian very famously said to Stephen Colbert that we are all bags of particles, and that went really well.
He said that's a great pickup line, which I thought was and it is actually.
You should try it. Wish I were still dating. But we don't know. So these are particles, right? This is particles. You and I are particles. We're all made up of the same stuff, and you and I have consciousness, and this table doesn't, and we don't know why, right?
We don't know why. Now, there are some things that you can say about that question. Clearly, there's a difference between you and the table. There are many ways of framing the differences, but for this question, the most important one is you have a certain molecular organization that the table does not have. And that allows you to respond to the environment in a wealth of ways that the table can't. And among the things that you can do is you can take in sensory information from the external world and process it inside your head in a way that the table cannot. Now, it may be that consciousness is nothing but the flow of particles and the information that they carry within a sufficiently organized, coherent, complex structure. In our particular case, that's a 3.3-pound gray, gloppy, corrugated, crenellated object that sits in this bone cave perched on our shoulders, right? I mean, so that is where it happens for us. And it may be that consciousness is simply the result of complex organization, and this is correct motion of particles. So it may be that we just come to that conclusion. Now, especially in a world where we're headed toward artificial versions of intelligence, if we have sufficient evidence, I would imagine one day talking to artificial systems that they too, they report, you know, Chat GPT 1000 says, I really am depressed. I'm really, you know, Brian, I'm really sad. And I'm not, you know, I'm not just saying that, I really am feeling it right now. You know, if that really happens, we may, and we're convinced, we may come to the conclusion that consciousness just is the result, an emergent property that comes from sufficiently complex calculations. That may be the answer.
What you are 100% certain of is that consciousness does not provide free will, right? There is, you say there is no free will.
Yeah,
Do all scientists say there's no free will?
No, but they didn't have any choice in their answer. But
you could have predicted that.
Yeah. But yes, I should qualify slightly. Under the assumption, which I'm confident of, but nobody really knows from what we just said, if consciousness is nothing but the result of certain physical processes, then I'm convinced that we don't have free will, that free will is a misleading notion. But if you're of the perspective that no, you got the physical, but consciousness is something else. You know, it's out there, some consciousness field that's governed by completely different considerations.
Which scientists did think, right, in the
Some
19th
people,
century?
well, what they did was, and it's a really good reference, they didn't think that about consciousness per se, they thought about life.
Vitalism?
Vitalism. So the idea was you can have whatever organization of matter that you want, but it will never be alive until you inject something else from the outside, a life force. You know, vitalism is exactly the right way of talking about it. But nobody believes that, at least almost nobody believes that any longer, because as we have understood life at the molecular, the biomechanical, and so forth, as we've gone deeper and deeper, the need for something beyond the physical has evaporated. And so, whereas life was so mysterious 100 years ago that we envisioned you needed something else for things to become alive, we no longer feel that way, and I suspect consciousness now feels so incredibly mysterious. I mean, where does this inner world inside of our heads come from? Why don't we just do what we're doing without an inner world taking place behind our eyeballs? You can imagine that that could be the way that we are, and yet we are not. So it feels deeply mysterious. But it may be that as we understand it better, as with vitalism, the idea of something from the outside will just go away. That's my expectation. Now, we didn't talk about the free will part, and I'm happy to...
Go for it.
Yeah, you know, so once you get there...
I have to confess, I would never argue with you about anything. And I wouldn't even argue with you about free will. But there is a part of me, I'll listen, and I'll be like, well, yeah, that sounds right. Of course, I'm sure that's all right. I'm sure all that science is right. And then I will walk out of here thinking, I have free will.
And
what is
by the way,
that?
I will too.
You will?
Absolutely. Because you need to describe the world using many levels of analysis, many kinds of stories, right? So right down at the particle level, the electrons, the quarks, the neutrons, and so forth, they, we believe, are fully governed by physical law.
Yeah.
And so if thought is nothing but the motion of particles like that inside of your head, then all of your thought and all of your behavior, right? Like right now, I just seemingly felt like I made a choice to lift up the cup, but what was it?
Are you telling me you didn't?
I didn't. At a molecular level, look inside me as I do this. Really peer inside me, right? It's just the motion of particles in my head, alerting particles in my arm to contract and move. It's just the motion of particles. If you didn't know that I was a living system, you just say, oh, wow, a lot of particles moving, all governed by the laws of physics. I mean, think about it. My particles. It's not like they move according to the laws of physics for a while, and then they say, hang on, guys, stop. Wait for Brian to make a decision. Okay, he's made a decision, keep going. That's not how physics works. The laws are governing all of the time. And so if the laws are governing all the time, then they were governing the decision that I seemingly made. So right down at the particulate level, it seems quite clear to me that the notion of our interceding in their motion is incoherent. But go up to the human level, right?
That's
The chemical,
incredible.
The biological, the psychological, the physical. You come to the human level, and like you, I experience a world in which I seem to have free will. What do I view that as? I view that as it's useful, probably from an evolutionary perspective, for us to have the sensation of free will. The sensation is real.
Oh, Mum's
We
back.
all have it all the time. I feel like I'm in the driver's seat right now. I feel like I'm making the choices and decisions of my next word and action and so forth.
But we're
the
not.
sensations are real, but the fundamental freedom of will to which that sensation seems to point, that is illusory.
It makes me think of kind of
then
what
what's
you move
controlling
into in the
us?
second half of the book about how crucial it is in the unfolding of human existence to make up stories, to make up narratives. In a way, the way you just described it is that if none of us has free will, to function as human beings, then it is a fiction. It is a story we tell ourselves that we are in charge of our actions.
Yeah.
Right? And I want to move into that part of the book. I'm more on the art side, and it speaks to me, right? So I make meaning in my life by I actually survive an experience by trying to figure out what it means, by turning it into a story that I can probably tell somebody else. And you are a gifted writer, and you help make meaning by recognizing patterns in the universe, and the way you write them down is not only words, but numbers, right?
Yeah.
Will you talk about how language fits into not only our, the way we face our very short time on this earth as humans, but into evolution?
Yeah, I mean, so, as we have tried to survive, a vital part of that echoes exactly
going
what
ham.
you are describing.
That has been activated.
We have a need to anchor our experience through some kind of meaning. Presumably, those of our ancestors who had that capacity to invest their experiences with more than just mere survival, but survival for a reason, were the ones that prevailed. And they ceded to us this intrinsic urge to invest experience with meaning. And so what do? We make up. I mean, the universe has no meaning. It's just collections of particles moving under the laws of physics. That's all that there is.
You have this line where you say we want to hug the universe, and it's unrequited.
That's
The universe
right.
will never hug us back.
We urge for the universe to give us something more than laws of physics and being collections of particles, but the universe is unable to meet that need. So what do? We make up our own meaning. And how do we make that up? By telling a whole variety of stories. Some of them communicate information to our peers and to the next generation, but some of it we tell in order to feel a greater connection, a greater social connection to those around us, a greater connection to the universe at large. And those stories take a whole variety of forms. And I do consider the laws of physics to be one very particular, very precise story that shows how we are, in a literal sense, connected to the cosmos. But as you go up into the endeavors of human capacity to write novels and plays and to create, it evidences this urge for meaning, and it shows how wonderfully capable we are of inventing tools and techniques for giving us a sense of greater connection.
And you quote Proust, who said, "Only through art can we enter the secret universe of another."
And I think that reflects also to the question that you're asking about language.
Yeah.
So language is only one way of telling stories. It's a powerful way of telling stories because it allows for a certain precision and flexibility in the ideas that we want to communicate. But I think we're all deeply aware that there are ways of knowing the world that are beyond language. Not everybody agrees with that, right? Wittgenstein would not have agreed with that, right? The limits of language are the limits of my world is the approach that he envisioned to be the case, that it's all rooted in language. But I think anyone who's had the experience which I don't want to get all lofty here, but if you have that sort of transcendent moment, which is not something you articulate in words, and it's not an inner story that you're telling yourself in words, you're just experiencing this thing that's transporting you to someplace else. It's a way of knowing the world that is beyond language, and I believe that's what Proust was referring to.
Yes, it is. I have spent my life getting literal chills when I see a Broadway show, right? And I'm never not grateful for it. I'm like, this is, and I don't have to have words for it. This is what art does to me. It may, I don't know what gives you chills, but.
Well, there are many examples, and to me, it's not only that I don't have words. I'm thankful that I don't have words because I don't want it to be words. When I try to put it into words, I diminish it. It's just the raw experience, which itself is what matters.
Transcendence.
Yes.
So there's a question here, and it leads into a story I want you to tell. So you've just expressed how the arts are a way we deal with the human condition, and of course, religion and spirituality and belief. There's a chapter you have called Brains and Belief, and you write, the evolutionary package deal. The victorious, evolved brain has qualities that embrace religion with open arms. And someone here asks, in your view, how does spirituality fit into the practical understanding we have of ourselves and our place in the universe? Would you please tell the story of walking with your dad and your sister in the late 60s at the, what's it called, the Naumburg Bandshell? That's just right on Poets Walk in Central Park.
Yeah, so, you know, this was the late 60s, although my brother corrects me, it was probably 1970. Okay. So it'll be in the next edition. You know, so my brother's 13 years older than I am, and he left to be a Hare Krishna in the 60s. And I had not seen him in quite some long time. And so my father took my sister and I to what was a Hare Krishna happening at the bandshell there. And I'm looking and I'm like, oh my God, is that my brother? You know, shaved head and playing and singing. And it was quite a moment for me because I had no idea at that point that he had gone into this particular faith. And so it was my father's way of, I don't know, gently taking us to this realization that his life had gone in a different direction than perhaps we had anticipated.
And you write about how you talk about your brother's Vedic search for stability. You have a healthy respect for religion in this book, why people need it, right? Or spirituality, in your words. And you write about your his Vedic search for stability is akin to the lure you found studying fundamental physics.
Yeah, again, I really do see spiritual and religious practice as one of the other stories that we tell. And again, that's in no way meant to diminish.
On Christmas Day 2021, a massive rocket was launched from French Guiana, carrying not only the largest space telescope ever built, but also the hopes and dreams of thousands of scientists and engineers from 14 countries who made this moment happen. 2 months and 1 million miles later, the James Webb Telescope arrived at its destination. As its protective sun shields unfurled, as its golden mirrors locked into place, decades of those dreams were realized and exceeded. The James Webb Telescope has already produced images of the universe that are unprecedented in their clarity. These are gas clouds incubating young stars as seen through the Hubble telescope, and here, as seen through the Webb telescope. This is a gas cloud surrounding a dying star as seen by Hubble.
Look at that.
As seen by Webb. Closer to home, This is Neptune, as seen by
And then
and here by Webb.
with rings, with James Webb.
Gossamer rings barely glimpsed in the past. The Webb telescope has also captured the turbulence accompanying the birth of a star, the spiral arms of a phantom galaxy,
Twitch, YouTube, all of that jazz.
rings formed by orbiting binary
Hick.
stars, as well as new images of our
Said should be announced live on any of them.
including what may well be the first stars created after the Big Bang. The data
Yes,
is
basically, yeah.
already challenging our understanding of how early galaxies formed and holds the promise of insights into the nature of black holes, dark matter, and dark energy. So today we are thrilled to discuss these results with the very people who are peering through the lens of humankind's most powerful tool for
Look at them images.
revealing for us all a startling new view of the cosmos.
Oh, is she on the move? No, just another clean.
Good afternoon. So good to see all of you. I'm Brian Green, and as many of you may know, I come from the world of theoretical physics, where we use mathematics, we use equations to try to push the frontiers, the boundary of understanding. But of course, that mathematics, it doesn't have any role in articulating and understanding the universe until that math makes contact with experiment, with observations. And of course, leading the way in the realm of observations is indeed the device, the James Webb Space Telescope that you just saw a brief summary of. And so it is wonderful to have a discussion of the cutting edge results that are now coming from the telescope. We're going to organize
Yo, thank you very much for a follow.
course meal. In the first part, we're going to
Welcome,
focus
welcome.
on the insights.
Not sure if you're the person I was just in the Discord call with. Yeah, I thought it was, yeah.
Things of that sort. We'll then switch over to a second group of guests who will focus
No,
more
thank you very much for doing that.
local neighborhood, what James Webb is revealing regarding the solar system, planets, asteroid, comets.
Do you like the new follow alert that we got as well? That was sick.
Part,
I love how that
over
looks.
to a focus on what we are learning about planets beyond our solar system, so-called exoplanets.
Yeah.
And I think the collective result of these conversations will really give you a sense of the true wonder of discovery that the James Webb Telescope is already
We've got a new theme coming soon as well, apparently, which I'm going to have to get.
in store. Okay, so let's get going. Joining us here in Brisbane is Carl Glazebrook, who is Distinguished Professor of Astronomy at the Center of Astrophysics and Supercomputing.
Oh, this is going to be a proper space talk.
In
This
Melbourne.
one.
He is the current co-director of the James Webb Australian Data Center. Carl, thanks so much for being here. And joining us from Washington, D.C., we have Nobel laureate John Mather, who is NASA's senior project scientist for the James Webb Space Telescope. He has spent most of the past 3 decades bringing the Webb Telescope to fruition.
Hey.
Welcome to you both. So, John, let's begin with you. You and I, over the years, have had many conversations. One in particular, of course, stands out, which was in December of 2021. I believe it was December, just before the launch of the James Webb Telescope. And in that conversation with a number of other scientists, you were describing, a certain degree of confidence, perhaps a little anxiety about what might transpire over the next year and a half. Here we are now, a year and change later. What do you think? How has it done?
It has worked beautifully. We are so thrilled with what it's doing and what it's showing us. And the observations are perfect. They're gorgeous. The pictures are beautiful in a way that we never could have imagined. And technically, the observatory is twice as good as we thought it would be. The pictures are much sharper. We can see better than we ever hoped we could ever do. So, combination of surprises in the beauty, surprises in the technical performance, And even the predicted life of the observatory is now over 20 years. So it gives us time for people who are just being born to come up and use the telescope.
Now that is remarkable, and you actually, I don't know if you heard it, but you got at least one person applauding for the for the 20-year lifetime. Now yes. So when we first spoke about this, I gather it was more of a 10-year lifetime with the possibility of longer based on how much fuel was used to orient things once you got to the target location, the so-called Lagrange point. So I gather that must have gone incredibly well.
Yes, it did. The launch vehicle got us exactly where we wanted to go, to use the least possible amount of extra fuels for adjusting the orbit. And we thank the Arianespace company because they did it beautifully.
Yeah, so that is really wonderful. We're going to talk about a number of topics, but I'm just wondering, off the top of your head, is there one insight that has come from the telescope so far that really stands out for you?
There really is. We were surprised. A lot of astronomers are very surprised that the galaxies seem to have grown hotter and faster and bigger than we ever imagined they would, and we don't know why. So that's the big observational surprise. You could say, well, how come were we wrong? Well, I can't tell you yet, but we know from pictures that we made with the Hubble Space Telescope, we extrapolate to what we think would happen farther back in time than Hubble could see, and something's wrong about that. We don't know. So one possibility is that galaxies are dusty. Dust grains absorb starlight and turn it into infrared. So the Webb telescope can pick up the infrared that we might never have noticed before. So that's a possible explanation for the puzzle that we've been looking at. But at any rate, right now we just have a puzzle which is not understood.
That was mad. She's just like, Juno, let Caelus
This
be.
is an area that you work on. So can you just elaborate some of them when John just met them? What is
Juno! Caelus is trying to find the freaking nipple. Let it find the nipple.
Very exciting 9 months.
Sorry,
I've been waiting for Webb
Caelus.
for 30 years, and we were expecting to discover
Fragile thing. It's still got his umbilical cord.
mission. We weren't expecting to discover them in the first week. Literally, these galaxies up here were found within 1 week of
Juno,
seeing
what's
the
up?
first data from Webb. And these are seen just a few hundred million years after the Big Bang, and they're very bright. And they had eluded Hubble because they're so high redshifted. They're beyond what Hubble could see, but they're still...
Yeah, that's my 3-day-old kitten. And then in the bottom left of the screen, we're learning about space. Hence, Kitten Caelus Space.
a puzzle of this sort? Obviously, it requires.
So the video, you got the presenter, he's called Brian Green.
You don't just want
That's him right there. And then the other two dudes are working on the James Webb Space Telescope. So they're talking a lot about the JWST at the moment.
Do you make those measurements, and what degree of confidence do you have in them?
So Webb can do...
Can you hear it all right?
Can take images at different wavelengths, and from the brightness of the light in different colors, you can deduce how far away the galaxy is and when you're seeing it. And it can also take what's called spectra, where the light
What's
is
she
spread
doing
out,
to this kitten?
analysed in great detail, and then you can exactly now what's called the cosmic redshift, the epoch at which you're seeing the galaxy.
And so maybe we can just spend a moment on that, because I think it's pretty vital to everything that's going on. So John, just quickly, when we're talking about redshift, I think many people are familiar with the idea. It's sort of the stretching of light. I think we have a little graphic on it. Can you just take us through what that is and why it's important to understanding these observations?
Yes, so the general idea that we have...
So this guy, he's the NASA lead scientist, project lead for JWST from NASA.
Roughly proportional to the distance. So if you divide the distance by the speed of motion, you get the apparent age of the universe. So that was 1929 we found that out. And what this picture is showing you is that when an object is going away from us, we receive the waves less frequently than we would have if it were just sitting still. So that stretches out the wavelengths, and we now use this as a measure of how rapidly the object is going away from us. So that's the reason that we have to build an infrared telescope to see those first galaxies.
Now, Carl, one question obviously that comes to mind for anyone who's been following the news. You noted how quickly those galaxies were found, and pretty quickly it was also announced the redshift, namely, how far away and how early in the evolution of the universe we believe that they formed. that number was updated also pretty quickly too. And so why did that happen? Why was there a change in our understanding that happened so rapidly?
Yeah, so the very first objects had, a few were discovered had very high redshift. That was inferred from the distribution of light in different wavelengths. But then the Webb telescope had to be recalibrated when it was in space, and those calibrations changed, and they changed the balance of the light, and that changed some of the redshift answers and brought a few of them down.
And so right now, are we confident that the redshifts that are being reported are stable? We're not going to likely update those in a month or 6 months?
There's a range. Some of them were really confident. Some of them were not so confident. And for some, we actually now have spectra where we can just do this dispersing the light and measure the redshift exactly. It is about 3 or 4 now. We've confirmed spectra at this redshift 12 epoch, which is about a few hundred million years after the Big Bang. So we're now sure about those ones. And we're going to get very many more in the next few months.
And so the puzzle then is that these galaxies formed really early, and they're really massive and really bright. And our standard understanding of galaxy formation would not suggest that something that big, that bright could form that quickly. Is that the issue?
Yes, so there's 2 things. There's firstly the galaxy formation models, which predicted that galaxies would be smaller and fainter and rarer. And then we had an empirical extrapolation from Hubble into its earlier time, which again suggested we wouldn't find that many. So both of those seem to be wrong.
And so is that something that people are upset about or excited by?
I personally am delighted. It makes it more interesting and makes clue us into the interesting physics happening early in the universe.
And do you have any idea what that might be?
Yes, so somehow you have to form these galaxies very quickly and build up mass. So galaxy formation is dominated by the roles called cold dark matter. Galaxies can't form without cold dark matter. So if I'm allowed to speculate outrageously, I perhaps think that James Webb may give us clues into the nature of cold dark matter in the early universe.
So you're saying the cold dark matter is what forms the gravitational center.
Yes.
That pulls in the surrounding material that ultimately does become the galaxy, but nobody knows what the dark matter is, and perhaps some quality, unexpected quality of it might explain things.
So that's an outrageous speculation of mine, but I have a hunch.
And so if that's the case, is that a major rewrite?
Yes.
You think so?
Yes. We will see. I could well be wrong.
Right. And I'm just wondering, behind that conjecture, is there deeper understanding that you don't want to share yet for it being too soon to let out? Because we're very friendly here, and
we see a lot of puzzles in the early universe. So this slide that we're seeing now shows some quench galaxies we found with Hubble. They're living about 1 billion years after the Big Bang. But these galaxies are really massive. They're about 5 times more massive than the Milky Way is today. Remember, the Milky Way has been forming for 12 billion years.
Yeah.
So this is like a cosmic snapshot of 1 billion years after the Big Bang. These galaxies are super massive and super old. And the one at the bottom right we found from a spectrum with Webb, it's like 1 billion years old already. So that points to something really crazy happening in the early universe in terms of early star formation, early galaxy formation.
And so, John, when you hear about this, I mean, I've noticed in previous conversations with you that you always take the burden of wondering if somehow the observations are wrong. And I think that's a laudable place to be, because if you're talking about major rewrites of understanding, you want to make sure that the data
a big point to be.
Where do you stand in this? Could it be that 6 months from now the observations we realize aren't as accurate as we thought, or what do you think?
I think the observations will turn out to be accurate, but the interpretation is tricky. You see what we showed you there on the picture are little fuzzy dots. And it's barely possible to see that they have a shape and a size and a color. And so we have to make up our entire interpretation based on a few little fuzzy dots with a spectrum and a color. And so that's a big, big jump, and we do it with calculation and imagination, and we could miss something. We could fail to imagine what's really going on out there, and that's where our interesting physics is going to come from, as we try to make our imagination match the reality.
Final question on this work in progress. In order to really understand galaxy formation, obviously there's fundamental physics involved.
The other dude's so nervous, bless him.
But ultimately, you got to put this stuff into a powerful computer and crank it through the code because it's too complex for us. Maybe ChatGPT can do it, but we can't do it, in our own minds. And so, when you get to that level of simulation, aren't there a lot of wheels and bells and things that you can tweak that might take your galaxy formation simulation and allow it to match the data?
There is and there isn't. So galaxy formation is, as you say, a complicated process. You have gas condensing, stars forming, but there are some fundamental constraints. So we can simulate the behavior of dark matter quite precisely. So given the properties of dark matter, we can say how big these dark matter halos or globules of dark matter are at early times. And we know the sort of what we call the baryon density of the universe, number of atoms per cubic megaparsec. So we have some basic information about how many atoms there are to form galaxies. So we're getting sort of close to sort of violating some of those basic constraints in terms of how rapidly you have to convert gas into galaxies.
Yeah. All right, so we'll see where that goes, but it's certainly an exciting prospect that when we understand it, the things may turn out differently from what we thought. Another relevant topic, John, that has certainly been an interesting motivation for certain class of observations is called the Hubble tension, a discrepancy between the expansion rate of the universe as determined by two distinct approaches. Can you, just in a brief moment, explain what that tension refers to?
Yes, well, one model that's been used very well is to take the hot and cold spots, what we call anisotropy, in the maps of the cosmic microwave background radiation, and get the statistics. And there is so many little wiggles and bumps in these curves that you can adjust a model of the universe to match it very precisely. And we do that, and we think we know what the answer is, and we get one number. And then we should be able to match that to direct measurements of the expansion rate of galaxies running away from us. And we get a different answer. And it's highly statistically significant. There's this is a 5 sigma or so, which means there's a almost very low chance that this happened by some random process. So something real is happening, but we can't tell yet if it's a mistake in our observations, a mistake in our interpretation, or just something nature is surprising us with, such as a new kind of dark matter, a new kind of dark energy, or something else that would be really exciting to discover. So if there's a Nobel Prize in here, that could be one of them.
As spoken by a Nobel Prize winner. Yes, absolutely.
Good advice.
So just briefly, dark matter and dark energy, I think we're all familiar. They're ingredients in the universe that we have some confidence are there. They don't give off light, but they do affect the expansion rate of the universe. And therefore, if we find something funny with the expansion rate, we might be finding something funny about dark matter and dark energy. Now, Carl, famously, there have been arguments about the expansion rate of the universe going all the way back to Hubble himself, right? I mean, and so perhaps if someone heard about this Hubble tension, they would say, it's just one of those things that, ultimately will be worked out. But this one feels different because we're not comparing two approaches that are effectively the same but done by two different groups to get the expansion rate of the universe. Now we're getting the expansion rate from early universe observations, the cosmic microwave background radiation that John mentioned, and observations of the later universe and trying to interpolate between them, but the interpolation is not working. So where do you come down on that? Is this a big deal?
It's an extremely big deal. It's the biggest problem in cosmology. So you're right. What it is a mismatch between the expansion rate at early times and the expansion rate today. And today, with the expansion is dominated by dark energy, early times of dark matter. We have a model to connect those, but the model doesn't quite match up. And when we measure it today, we have a dozen different ways we can measure that, and they all converge to a given answer, which is significantly discrepant to what we inferred from the early universe. So where James Webb can help is actually connecting those dots. There are techniques that James Webb can apply. We can measure the expansion rate at intermediate times, and that may help us solve this problem.
And do you have a sense? I mean, John mentioned possibly a new understanding of dark matter, dark energy. Would you go in that direction too?
Yeah, I would.
Okay, so we just have to wait and see where that one goes. Third topic is something you described this as the most important puzzle in cosmology. Other people have described the holy grail of observational cosmology to see what's known as population 3 galaxies or stars, which would be the first stars ever formed after the Big Bang. And correct me if I'm wrong, but just to give a relative sense, we believe that our sun is a third generation star, sort of a grandchild of the earliest stars. Have we seen the first stars or evidence thereof?
There's been some claims, but the claims have yet to be confirmed by more detailed observations. So let me tell you what we're looking for. So stars make heavy elements. So for example, carbon, oxygen, the stuff that makes up our bodies. So in the early universe, there was none of those elements. There was just hydrogen and helium and a bit of lithium. And so stars formed in the early universe in what's called a pristine environment, and that changes their properties and makes them more massive. For example, you have more massive stars. So the signature of this population 3 is no heavy elements, extremely massive and hot stars. So those are the two key things to look for.
Yeah.
And the light you're seeing is coming from stars and not from something like black holes. And so there are observations to suggest that of at least one galaxy, but it's not yet clear whether those observations could be explained by population 3 or by some kind of unusual black hole.
So that, again, is an open question, but do you anticipate that we will, with the James Webb, be able to finally conclusively...
Yeah. I think we can go back and re-observe many things in more detail where we find these signatures, and we can look at higher resolution, get longer exposures. I think we'll resolve this in the first few years.
First 2 years of observation, fantastic. Well, you know, because we're on a sort of speed dating approach to talking about the James Webb today, our time for this first section is almost out, but I do want to finish up with one final question to both of you. Start with you, Carl. In your wildest dreams, 5 years from now, what will we know that we don't know today from the James Webb?
How the first galaxies formed? What's driving the physics of that rapid early formation? Is it some modification to like the sort of the wheels of galaxy formation, or is it something more fundamental like dark matter or dark energy?
And John, for you, since you've started us off with this enticing 20-year time span, perhaps I'll push you 20 years from now, as the Webb is reaching its final year of operation. What do you think the most stunning thing that you hope that we will achieve with the observation time?
Well, there are two things where I think we could get a big surprise. One is the early universe we've been talking about, and the origin of the giant black holes. You know, almost every galaxy has a giant black hole in the center, and we haven't really talked much about how that happens, but I think we could get a big surprise in that area. And of course, the other area where in 20 years we could really learn something is something about the exoplanets. It's one of the other very, very difficult puzzles that we're working on, and we're working very hard on them, so something just could turn up.
And indeed, we will be talking about exoplanets in part 3 of Speed Dating. So with that, please join me in thanking our guest for part 1. Carl, thank you so much. John, thank you. All right, so in part 2, we are going to move on to what the James Webb is telling us about the physics and astronomy in the more local environment, planets, asteroids, comets in our solar system. And to do that, I am going to be joined by a couple of wonderful guests. First, here in Brisbane is Michelle Bannister, who is a New Zealand planetary astronomer and science communicator at the University of Canterbury, who, among other research, will be using the Webb telescope to gain insight into how planets formed in our solar system. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
And joining us from Washington, D.C. is Stephanie Milam, who is Deputy Project Scientist for the James Webb Space Telescope at NASA. Stephanie studies comets and asteroids to understand what role they may play in the evolution of planetary systems like our own. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks so much for having me.
So again, thank you both for being here. Michelle, let's begin. So you study what I gather are called Neptunian-like objects, which are small, icy objects that are far out in the solar system. Can you tell us why do you study them, and how does the Webb particularly help you in that endeavor?
So these are the little building blocks from the beginning of our planetary system. We think they form around other stars as well. The ones out beyond Neptune, the ones trans-Neptunian objects, these are the ones that are a little more icy in composition. So they're out beyond where water ice could still stay solid. And so they're dusty, they're icy, they're cousins of comets, but they can tell us about what that disk was like when it formed, and their little icy hearts hold the secrets of how that evolution has come through to the present day.
It warms one's heart to hear about those icy hearts.
About 80, 60 to 80 Kelvin above absolute zero. It's nice.
Pretty warm by some standards. But are there particular members of that class of astronomical bodies that you've identified that you want to study, or you just sort of look out and see what's interesting?
So I have the pleasure of being part of a team of collaborators around the world, and led by a colleague in the US who are looking at about just over 60 of these small worlds to see what the variation of surfaces is like. So what are we going to see in terms of composition? And more than 80% of those targets have now been observed by JWST. So we're looking forward to being able to release those results soon.
And is JWST particularly set up to do this? I mean, what are the wavelengths that you are looking in? And I presume they overlap strongly with what the James Webb is sensitive to.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if you look in the wavelengths of light you see with your eyes, these objects look quite red surfaces. So they don't have the fingerprints of that composition as easily able to discern. But when you start getting into the wavelengths that JWST can see in, you'll start to see those fingerprints of composition. And a lot of these molecules, they're things like you might get in your kitchen cleaning cupboard, right? It's these kind of ammonia compounds or methane or things that, are elements in our atmosphere here that we breathe, like carbon monoxide that we exhale, or things like carbon dioxide.
And is that
water.
surprising that you see those particular molecules?
We think that it's cold enough in the outer solar system they can be stable. So how much of them there are, which worlds they're on, where they're present, this is what Webb is going to help us unlock.
Amazing. So Stephanie, there's a beautiful image. Maybe we have it here, and I think we had it in the original piece, of Neptune as viewed by Hubble and then as viewed by the James Webb Space Telescope, where all of a sudden you see these rings. Now, when I was a kid, it was only Saturn that had rings. So, what was your reaction when you saw this image?
I was absolutely amazed. I think everyone in the world was amazed by this image. It's absolutely one of my favorites so far. What is absolutely fascinating about the capability of the James Webb Space Telescope for objects in our own solar system, or even those beyond, is we are a ring detection machine. A lot of rings around the planets, or small bodies even in our solar system, are made of dust and ice. And the wavelengths that James Webb actually operates at is very tuned in to seeing these rings, as you can see in this image. Some of these rings in this Neptune image we haven't seen for 30 years, not since the Voyager flyby. So it's absolutely fantastic that just in a mere blink of an eye, this telescope has the capability to detect things that we haven't seen without a spacecraft being nearby for decades.
And so the rings that we see here, the rings that we're more familiar with, Saturn and so forth, are they more or less the same? Or are there distinct signatures that you learn something specific about what you're looking at?
So that's a fantastic question. Some of the rings are the same, and some of them are very different. We're getting insight and clues into this almost every single day now with the James Webb Space Telescope, but also with other observatories that we've used in the past. Some of the rings we can actually see at optical or visible wavelengths. So you can see a lot of the rings of Saturn, as you said. We could even see with, the stretch of an eye, rings of Jupiter. But those are the rings that tend to be a lot more icy, a lot more reflective. So the ones that are more dusty are the ones that JWST is revealing to us that we can't see with other observatories. So even in this image of Jupiter, you can already start seeing those rings starting to appear. And this was a fantastic capability and demonstration for this observatory. You know, the James Webb Space Telescope's designed to detect the farthest galaxies